Hi, this is Jurgen Rasmussen speaking. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis channel. This particular vlog is titled uh, The Hallucinated Serial Killer Experiment. It's an experiment that I spontaneously did with a client probably 5 or 6 years ago, which resulted in both me and the client having a very deep insight at the same time. And it's an experiment that I've modified to help other clients, numbers of clients, have a similar insight in the years since. So here's how it goes, and what it's all about. Now, I worked with a woman, a school teacher in her mid 50s, who I had already seen her son and her daughter. By the way, this is an interesting thing about female clients. Very often they want to send their kids and their husbands first, as clients to kind of see what's up, and then if the kids seem to benefit, they will come. I always imagine it would be the opposite, that the courageous women would want to go first, and then, if it's safe or useful, send their kids. Something strange going on there. But anyways, I had worked with her son and her daughter for various issues, both very successfully in case of the son, and moderately successfully, quite a bit of improvement with the daughter. So the mother came as a client. Now, her presenting issue was what she called social anxiety, meaning she would be very anxious and self-conscious in certain social contexts. Now, we had a really good first session, which essentially was about me helping her discover that her feelings came from her thinking, uh, not the social situations in of themselves. So when she came back for the second session, she noted quite a bit of an improvement, but she said, I still have the issue. There are some people, very, people with a lot of inner authority, um, people who kind of take charge. When I'm around those people, I just kind of freeze up. Now, the feelings are so strong that there has to be something to it. Now, she thought that the fact that the feelings were so strong said something about the situation, said something about the other people, and said something about her self-worth. Some deficiency story about her not quite being enough or being damaged in some way. This is very common. So I had great rapport with her. I knew I had a lot of trust since I'd worked successfully with her kids. So I said, are you up for a mind experiment? And she said yes. Now, having gotten that consent, I started talking about how I was a serial killer, that I had killed several people, and that I just hadn't been caught yet. And I started giving various suggestions to really get her imagination going. Used very vague, very permissive language, a lot of embedded commands, all designed to guide her imagination, her automatic imagination and emotions, to kind of hallucinate me as a serial killer, and her having the experience of being in this locked room. Behind me is the door. There she is. There's a serial killer between her and the door. And her eyes got really wide. Her breathing changed. Her face got more white. You could see all the common expressions of fear. She got kind of restless in her seat, and after a while, she tentatively stood up and was about to charge out the door. And I yelled, "Stop!" Which kind of jolted her, and she just froze for a second. I said, "I'm not actually a serial killer. You'll just have to, take my word for it. I've never killed anyone. It was just the most ridiculous thing I could make up to make a point. Now, sit down." which she did, looking at me in a very bewildered way. And I asked her, I said, now, you were clearly afraid. And she was like, yeah. She said, you turned evil. Your face changed. Your eyes changed. You turned completely evil. Now, where was the evilness, at the point, of course, in her thinking? So I said to her, how real was that for you? And she said, well, it was completely real. I said, on a scale from 1 to 10. He said, 10. It was, you know, evidenced by her about to run out the door. Now, this woman was a great hypnotic subject. She had great capacity for absorption and getting involved automatically into suggested realities. Very good at dissociation, very suggestible. So I looked at her and I said, "Look, if you can hallucinate that I'm a serial killer and have that hallucination be so real as real that it's a 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, and you're about to barge out of the room, if you can do that, then is it really true that the fact that you feel something really intensely means that there has to be some fact or some reality to it?" And she looked at me, and the whole house of cards came down. It was almost as if you could see that whole belief just crumble. And that was for her a life-changing insight. The insight being that the fact that she felt something really, really intensely and really, really strongly does not in any way, shape, or form mean that there's necessarily anything factual uh, going on. And she had the discovery that her entire experience was thought generated in the moment. So this was a tremendously powerful thought experiment for her. Now, here's for me the really interesting part. A couple of days later, I had another client who had a OCD diagnosis, obsessive compulsive disorder, essentially just a lot of thinking, rumination that felt very non-volitional and very repetitive and very negative. Now, I could sense very quickly that this woman was not very suggestible and not that great of a hypnotic subject. And she told me, she said, Jürgen, the thoughts are just so very negative. Like the contents of the thinking, it's just so very negative, and that's what's bothering me. Now, the content of the thinking was a lot about symmetry in her coats and her purses and her hair and stuff like that. So I immediately had a flash inspiration. I looked at her and I said, "Are you up for a mind experiment to make a discovery?" And she said, "Sure." So I did exactly the same thing as I did with the former client. Although in this case, there was no fear response. Her breathing didn't seem to change. Uh, so after having kind of completed my little stunt, I looked at her and I said, "I have some questions for you. Did you think the stuff that I invited you to think?" And she said, "Oh yeah, I kind of imagined that you were a serial killer, and I even imagined that you chopped off my legs and put them in a suitcase, and that I was kind of floating down the river." So she really got into the imagery. So I said, "Great." Then I looked at her and I said, "Would you agree that the content of that thinking was very negative?" I mean, few things would be more negative than having your legs chopped up and sent down the river and being in a room with a serial killer. And she said, yeah, those thoughts were very negative. Then I looked at her and I said, would you agree that the content of that thinking is more negative than the negative thinking that you have had around symmetry, coats, purses, hair, and stuff like that? She looked at me for a little while and she said, yeah. And I said to her, because no matter how repetitive and negative your thinking may be around symmetry and these other things you're obsessing about, it's really no match compared to the content of being killed by a serial killer. And she said, you're right. I said, now, here's my question for you. On a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is no stress whatsoever, and 10 is, being completely stressed out, when you had your eyes closed and you did the serial killer thinking, how stressed were you? She looked at me and she said, not at all, maybe a 0 to a 1. And that's when I had the insight. I looked at her and I said, great. You just had a fantastic insight, whether you know it or not yet. But you just made a major discovery. You know what the discovery is? The discovery is that negative thinking is not stressful. I'll repeat it. Negative thinking is not stressful. Negative thinking doesn't create stress. It doesn't create anxiety. It doesn't create fear. You don't have to change the thinking. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to change it into something positive either. You can, in principle, I'm not saying you'll always succeed, but you can, in principle, have the most negative thinking that the universe and the powers of evolution can provide, and at the same time have zero stress. The reason you didn't have any stress is not because you didn't think negatively. It's not because you had positive thoughts. It's due to the fact that even though you were thinking very negatively, you didn't believe the thoughts. You didn't buy into them. You completely knew that you were thinking as you were thinking. So there was no stress. For this client, this was a life-changing insight. And it was a big light bulb moment to me as well, because having come from a background of neurolinguistic programming, which I really cherish, hypnosis, having studied various schools of psychotherapy, such as rational emotive behavior therapy, all these different models. Many of these schools are good at helping people discover that they're not really feeling reality or other people or situations or objects directly, but what they're feeling an inference, a interpretation, thinking essentially about what's going on in the moment. They're really great at that for the most part, but there's very often this idea that you somehow have to change your thinking. You have to either change the content of your thinking, or you have to change how you think or how you relate to things, or create a new story or a better state or whatever. And I'm not completely knocking it. Having those tools, having the ability to change your thinking or how you think can be very useful. Some ways of thinking are more useful than others. I'll claim that as a fact. It's also true that you don't have to work on your thinking at all. You don't have to really do anything about your thinking. You have a self-correcting system internally where thoughts kind of just appear and they disappear on their own. And every time you really see that it's thinking, it's like waking from a dream in that particular moment. So some schools of thought, like various non-duality teachings and the three principles and stuff like that, are usually very good at emphasizing that you don't really have to work on your thinking or change your thinking at all. Simultaneously, this doesn't mean that you have to not do anything about your thinking. You can, you know. It's just that you don't really have to. And there's a deeper truth at play here too, and that is that most of us live with a kind of illusion of if we have thinking and feeling that we deem negative, that we call negative, we think that the path to freedom and peace is by somehow transmuting those thoughts or changing those thoughts into more positive thoughts or a different state. But freedom really lies in exactly the thinking and feeling that you currently have. The very experience that you're trying to change is really where freedom and peace is lying in the moment. So, last few years, I've still been using NLP techniques and hypnotic techniques and phenomena without implying that the power lies in the techniques, but I've been using it as thought experiments to help people have these sorts of discoveries at a deep level, not just at a cognitive level, but at a deep felt level. And there are many ways you can kind of set up thought experiments to help people discover what these clients discovered. So, I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, comments around this, feel free to get in touch. Till next time.